Now. So afternoon and welcome to everyone to the second session in the week-long webinar series organised by myself and Laili Uddin, a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at King's College London, and Simon Wolfgang Fox, Lecturer in Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at Freiburg University. Today's session is focused on Indonesia, and I'm delighted to introduce our three speakers. Rizky Amalia Afiat, editor of Islamic Bergerac and activist at the Progressive Islamic Forum based in Jakarta. Previously, she was active in Aceh Women's League, and she has also done peace-building work with women combatants in Mindanao and Nepal. She has a bachelor's degree in political science from University of Indonesia and holds a master's in violence, conflict and development from SOAS. Our second speaker is Muhammad Al-Fayadil, who's an activist, a theologian, a people's organizer in East Java, Indonesia. He's engaged with workers' union, student movements, and recently he's been engaged in the work of peasant unions. From 2017 to 2018, he worked as a member of the National Committee of the Nahdliyin Popular Front for Sovereignty of Natural Resources, which was affiliated largely with the Nahdlatul Ulama. He's also working as a writer and editor in Islam Bergerac, and his writings have been published in English and French. The third speaker is Lin Hongxuan, who's an adjunct lecturer at the Department of Southeast Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. He obtained his PhD from the University of Washington's History Department with a dissertation titled Ummah Yet Proletariat, Islam and Marxism in the Netherlands, East Indies, and Indonesia. He'll be 1915 to 59. He will be a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, Southeast Asia Center for 2021, where he will work on the circulation of progressive Islamic ideas across the Indian Ocean. So welcome. And I think we're going to kick it off with Lin Hongxuan for today's talk. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say, a special thank you to Lily and Simon for bringing me on board. Sawyer French as well, who facilitated that. I really appreciate it. I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. I see a lot of friends, colleagues, even some students here today. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope this will be a productive discussion. Really, I think my job today is not so much to present my own research, but to sort of give an appropriate historical context, provide an appropriate backdrop, for the real event, which is the activism and the work of Gus Al-Fayadil and Bak Rizky. And so what I'm going to attempt to do is sort of give a very quick introduction to like how to understand and how to situate Islamic socialism in Indonesia today, with reference to 20th century history primarily. Okay, so I did have a paper in mind I would have liked to present on today, and that paper is fundamentally about a particular period in Indonesian history, which I think is germane for us to begin our story. So I've decided, okay, so it begins with the 1930s, actually begins earlier, but that part is, I think, relatively well known, so I don't want to get into that much. Indonesia had, well, more specifically, the Netherlands, East Indies, had something of a tradition of Islamic communism, which is to say, because the Communist Party and Marxist ideas seemed the best vehicle for resisting the colonial state. It often attracted Muslims who used these ideas, who adapted them for their own purposes, right? And that's how they articulated their defiance to the colonial state. This culminates in a big rebellion in 1927, and 26 and 27 doesn't go that well. And for the rest of the colonial period, this, what we might call the Islamic communist movement, right, centered in particular places like Banten and Surakarta, it's on the quiet side. But I begin in the 30s, or I want to begin in the 30s today when we situate Islamic socialism, because I think the first truly Islamic socialist organization, self-consciously Islamic socialist, who are Muslims who think of themselves as socialists, who see the relevance of Marx, but do not feel beholden in any way to, the CPSU, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They do not feel beholden in any way to have to imitate the historical experiences of the Soviet Union. So that kind of Islamic socialism really only begins in the 1930s. And we see this with the emergence of movements like the Pendidikan Nasional Indonesia, which literally translates into Indonesian national education. It's a movement started by two of Indonesia's founding fathers, who were prime minister and vice president at various times, Sultan Syahrir and Muhammad Hatta. And these are really the upper echelons of the Republican leadership. They are very famous, still revered today. But what people tend to forget about them is that they had a distinctly socialist influence to their political thinking, and they had a distinctly Marxist frame of analysis when they analyzed colonial issues and when they thought about what kind of Indonesia they wanted to replace the colonial state. So to just give you a very brief example, right? The Pendidikan had a number of newspapers. I study about 4 of them. And the Pendidikan newspapers would run articles with titles like Communistis, communism, Dutch for communism, or Pelajaran Karl Marx, the teachings of Karl Marx, right? But not in a propagandistic way. These articles would provide explanations of the differences between communism, socialism, Bolshevism, social democracy. What's the difference between a Bolshevik and a Menshevik, right? They talk about how Bolsheviks are defined by their willingness to use violence in seizing power and to usher in to sort of accelerate historical processes, right? Through the establishment of a vanguard of the proletariat or a party dictatorship, something which the Pendidikan is clearly not comfortable with at all. So I think what you see here is that they are influenced by Marx ideas, right? But they really don't seek to emulate the experiences of the Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union, right? Not only were they influenced by Marx, they were also influenced by Austrian socialists like Otto Bauer and Max Adler, right? And they often describe themselves specifically as proletarian or representing proletarian interests. Okay, so that's why I say this is very identifiably socialist. Now, at the same time, organizations like the Pendidikan, led by Syahrir and Hatta, were also very identifiably Islamic and very self-consciously Islamic. So key Pendidikan leaders like Hatta, they moved in a very distinctly Muslim social milieu, right? And in fact, regional Pendidikan leaders, such as Darwis Taib from Sumatra, right? They often came from and maintained concurrent membership in Muslim organizations. Specifically, we'll talk about a Muslim organization called PERMI later. I'll come back to that in a minute. Darwis Taib was indeed a member of PERMI. These people were also often students and alumni of modernist Islamic schools, right? Of what we will call a madrasa, right? And they often maintained their membership in organizations that were associated with these modernist Islamic schools, like the Persatuan Murid Diniyah School, the PMDS, the Union of Diniyah School Students, right? And they saw no problem balancing these basically participation in Muslim organizations alongside participation in what is very clear to me is a socialist organization. So to just give you a sense of how imbricated these things are, right, or how self-consciously Islamic many Pendidikan members were, this aforementioned Darwis Taib, he published an article in Daulat Rakyat, which was the main journal of the Pendidikan, and he argued, I quote, "A member of the Pendidikan Nasional Indonesia who dies fighting for national freedom, is he judged by Allah as a kafir, an infidel?" It's a rhetorical question. Obviously, the answer is no. To be a nationalist, such as the Pendidikan wants one to be, does this make a Pendidikan member a murtad, an apostate to Islam? Right. Again, this is clearly a rhetorical question, and the answer is no. Right? But this is how self-consciously Islamic they are. They talk about Otto Bauer and Max Adler, and they interpret Marx, but at the same time, they are, deliberately embedding this within an Islamic frame of reference. Right? Okay, let me move on to my second example and final example, right, which is another Islamic organization from the 1930s called PERMI. Now, PERMI is basically one of the largest, actually, and most interesting because, okay, sorry, I'm getting carried away. One of the largest anti-colonial organizations of the 1930s, right? But it's not very well known. There really hasn't been much work done on it at all. And it's founded in 1930 by the alumni of this particular modernist Islamic madrasa called the Sumatra Tawalib in Padang Panjang in Sumatra, in West Sumatra. And this was actually a sort of hotbed for Islamic communism in the 20s, so it's really not surprising that an Islamic socialist organization came out of that milieu. And with PERMI, right, they were publishing newspapers, they were founding scouting organizations, holding public rallies, And it's particularly interesting because at their peak in December 1932, they had 7,700 registered members, 3,000 of whom were women. So unlike most anti-colonial organizations, women were not sequestered into a separate organization. They were very much part of the organization itself. And in this case, many of them held very high leadership positions. So Rasuna Syed is the best known, but there were many others, Rasima Ismail, within the organization. Okay, sorry, I'm getting lost in the detail again. Let me just give you one, pointed example that will sort of drive my point home. So Burmese main newspaper was called Medan Rakyat, and it was very explicit in its critique of capitalism and imperialism. They clearly drew inspiration from Lenin's Imperialism, the Higher Stage of Capitalism, originally published in 1919, as well as Karl Kautsky's Imperialism and the War, first published in 1914. I don't really have time to get into the details here, but let me just say that they very much embraced the rhetoric of anti-imperial solidarity. They made reference, and they learned from the historical examples of Egypt under Zagala Pasha, Iraq, Turkey under Atatürk. What just happened?
Sorry, Xuan, I was trying to mute a participant, and I unfortunately muted you. Sorry about this. This was not
no problem. Okay, so let me rush a little. Okay, so in the case of they learned from the historical experiences of Turkey, of Bolivia, of the Philippines, and all these are raised. The USSR is also brought up, right? And they propose these very concrete solutions, which evince a strong awareness of socialist praxis. Sorry. So they didn't just talk about historical experiences of other countries. They were also advocating. Can I continue? Okay. All right. So they didn't just try to learn from the historical experiences of other countries. They also proposed concrete policies, right, which very clearly had a strong awareness of socialist praxis in Europe and America. So articles by PERMI members such as Muhammad Dang Jogja argued that because capitalism and imperialism went hand in hand, Indonesia had to learn from Gandhi's Swadeshi movement. It explained how capitalists would extract profits from Indonesia by exploiting its natural resources cheaply, also by creating a captive market in which processed goods could be sold without competition, while simultaneously raising revenue through export duties. This article went on to quote the Quran, Surah Al-Qasas, to support its argument that God requires Muslims to look not only to the afterlife, but also to this one, exhorting them not to forget the welfare of one's fellow man in this world. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but my point is that you can see this imbrication of socialist praxis, socialist theory, international awareness, right? And it's all articulated within a very specifically Islamic framework, right? So, I'm done with my examples, but I do want to sort of like help this segue into the presentation that Gus Fayyadal and Bak Rizky will give. And I wanted to point out that very briefly, for those of you who don't know, after the Republic becomes independent, there is a solid period of nearly 10 years where there is a semblance of democracy. It's a genuine attempt to build a parliamentary democracy. Given the very difficult circumstances under which the Republic is born, however, parliamentary democracy is messy, it's difficult, it doesn't deliver results and quickly enough, at least. And Indonesia slips into a sort of autocratic, I wouldn't call it a dictatorship, but a sort of autocratic mode of governance under Sukarno. Sukarno was overthrown in '65 under the guise of a anti-communist push. Right, and this is something that really just has to be said for everyone who's not familiar with Indonesian history here. We are talking about a massacre of accused communists. So whether or not you were communists really didn't matter. The point was that maybe you had joined the local labor union, or maybe you were part of a reading club, right, that had some kind of link to some communist linked organization. You could be singled out as a communist, and This was civilian on civilian violence. The military guided it, but civilians perpetrated a lot of it. And we're talking about a minimum of 500,000 dead, and a maximum, the highball estimate by Jeff Robinson is 1.2 million. So this is Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot level kind of violence we're talking about, right? It may not be genocide, but it is horrendous and the scale is horrific. So, as you can imagine, when Suharto came to power under these circumstances, right, claiming that he had saved the country from the communism, anything to do with communism, socialism, Marxist theory, becomes taboo. It becomes very difficult to talk about. It's demonized. And even after the fall of Suharto in 1998, there continues to be a very widespread reluctance to discuss anything to do with Marxism, communism, Marxist critiques of capitalism, even though Indonesian society has in many ways moved on from that Cold War mentality. So my own scholarship attempts to sort of draw attention to Indonesia's own historical entanglements with Marxism, specifically an entanglement between Islam and Marxism, and how that was often very productive. It was always more aspirational than it was concrete, but I think those aspirations are very important. And I think this is how my work is relevant to that of Gusau Fajardo and Bak Rizky. I think in helping people to understand, and specifically helping Indonesians really to understand that their own history, right? In their own history, Islamic socialism was very much prominent, very much important in their anti-colonial struggle, helping them to understand that many of their most respected and venerated nationalist leaders were happy to draw on Marxist ideas as well as Islam and did not see any contradiction in those terms. Right? I think helping people to understand that to legitimize and to what's the word? It escapes me. To detoxify anything to do with Marxism. I think that's a necessary condition for a lot of the critiques that are central to the activism conducted by Muhammad Al-Fajardo and Rizky Afiat. Because if we can't understand how it is that capitalism is destroying our environment, if we can't understand how capitalism is degrading our societies, if we don't even understand the mechanics of it, then it's hard to fix that if you can't identify the problem in a meaningful way to begin with. So that's how I see my work interfacing with theirs. And I will leave it at that. I hope that provided sufficiently useful historical context for the discussion that we're going to have. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we have Gus Fajardo.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon and Laili and Lin Xuan for the interesting presentation. I just want to speak about Islamic socialism from the point of view that I understand and practice it in my recent activities as Muslim activist in Indonesia. And why I try to speak of my personal perspective, because I think that we in Indonesia we are really facing the challenge how to contextualize Islamic socialism in our language, in our own language. And this is only true. This is all the truism that Xuan has said about the importance of detoxifying Marxism and to reintroduce Marxism to Indonesian public, to Indonesian people, especially to the Muslim communities, to Ummah. And this is the great task and the most difficult one for me. And I and Mbak Rizky, I think we are not absolute representative of this voice of Islamic socialism, but I'm just a little stream in these potentialities, I think. So the first we have in Indonesia a challenge to create or to recreate Islamic socialism in our language, to create our own conception, because and this is I felt since especially the last three years that all the conception of the Western I mean the conception of socialism in the Western literature is not totally compatible to our condition. I mean, when we read, for example, the thoughts of Mr. Ali Engineer, Asghar Ali Engineer in Pakistan or in India, I think it's not not totally compatible with our condition, because we have a loss of memory. So it is only it is true that Swan had said about the rupture, the big discontinuities between post after the massacre of anti-communist of communist people in Indonesia after 65, yeah. So now, and then the second one is that the term Islamic socialism is not popular at all now in Indonesia, right? Because socialism, the term is socialism is an old terminology to mention this kind of struggle inspired by Marxism and so on, and even anarchism and so on. But this is not in Islamic discourse. It's not totally popular. So we have an alternative to call it progressive Islam and so on, or leftist Islam and so on. So this is our condition in Indonesia, our situation now in Indonesia. So the need to decolonize the Western heritage of socialism is very relevant to our case. So first, I want to present my PowerPoint actually, because. But I am sorry to Simon and Laili that I don't prepare a PowerPoint, but I note some points in my notebook. So Islamic socialism can be regarded as from two standpoints. The first, from idealistic view, yeah, or idealism. Islamic socialism is an ideology of a state, yeah. The second. Islamic socialism can be regarded as personal worldview or philosophy of somebody, and the third, Islamic socialism as a way of life or ethics, and from idealistic view, we can also regard or consider Islamic socialism as a method of struggle. And otherwise, we can look at the Islamic socialism as a comprehensive entity from materialistic view, from materialism. I mean that Islamic socialism can be regarded from materialistic standpoint as a state of ummah. So when a state of ummah tend to be socialistic than before, I think it is representative of the Islamic socialism from the materiality of society itself. And the second, Islamic socialism as a state of society in general, and not a Muslim community. And the third, from materialistic view, Islamic socialism for me is a practice of practice. I mean, to translating some doctrine of Islamic teaching into the practice of struggle. I think that both idealistic view and materialistic view is not contradictory, but complementary, and yes, complementary. The challenge is how to extract a typical materiality, typical condition from the ideals of Islamic socialism, And the second, how to build a typical worldview or doctrine conducive to that materiality state of being. In this respect, I want to go beyond the traditional conception that Islamic socialism is only ideology there by some people in some period of history. But because if we look at the historical materiality of any kind of society or ummah, we can evaluate at the each stage of history that some ummah or some society, some Muslim community has reached some goals of socialism. Otherwise, or they go backward to reactionary or conservative form of society and so on. So this is the main challenge for me as a thinker of socialism, or at least at activists of Islamic socialism, how to extract a typical materiality or condition from the ideals of Islamic socialism. And for that, we need to understand very well about what the ideas of Islamic socialism. And the second, how to build a doctrine, a set of thoughts and ideas conducive to that, relevant to that materiality. For me, in this aspect, Islamic socialism is not contradictory at all with socialism in general, because despite the fact that Islamic socialism might be different in its path or method towards socialism, because I believe in the fact that many, or I have some conviction that there are many paths to socialism. So there is no a single path to socialism, as for example, Bolshevik, our Bolshevik comrade teach, and so on. Because this, when we try to understand the relation between Islam and socialism, Islam is a sort of a doctrine, idealism. It is idealism, and otherwise socialism is also idealism. So from this conjunction of Islam and socialism, I think many paths to socialism can we realize in this context. So for me, Islamic socialism is an a priori framework for the struggle and creating a just world without class and exploitation and all forms of violence. So there are some utopian aspect in Islamic socialism, which is represented by the single phrase in Al-Quran, "Baldatun tayyibatun wa rabbun ghafur." I mean, it means that there is some utopia, some dream about society that is good. I mean, a just society, and God is very merciful to this kind of society. So the second, for me, Islamic socialism must be originate from the teaching of Al-Quran and As-Sunnah, and may be understood first as a dynamics in Muslim populated countries. So there are two points. The first is doctrine, or the teaching of Al-Quran and Sunnah, which is we can say that it is Al-Quran and Sunnah as scriptural heritage of Islam. And the second, historical experiences of Muslim society since more than the 1,000 years, and with all its intellectual heritage. For me, these two kind of the doctrine and history, the the teaching of Al-Quran and Sunnah, and the fact of historical development and so on must be related each other dialectically, because without the good understanding of Al-Quran and Sunnah, we lost an Islamic aspect of Islamic socialism. Otherwise, when we avoid the historical narrative of development of Muslim societies in more than 1,000 years, and until now, until the contemporary modern society and so on, we lost many heritage of socialism and so on. So for me, what I want to express about my view tonight, the need of specific hermeneutics, liberating hermeneutics, taking its depart from a specific understanding of Muslim society itself, the first, and the second of the capitalist society in general, and how to respond this actual challenge from the standpoint of teachings of the original teachings of Al-Quran and Hadith, and all the intellectual heritage of the ulama from more than 1,000 centuries and so on. So this need to condition first the critical, even revolutionary awareness about capitalism, and this cannot be done without critique of political economy. And the second, the awareness or the appreciation of the wealth of Islamic tradition itself. So I'm not totally same. I see that I'm a little bit different with the modernist approach of Islamic socialism, who thinks that, or which think that we must leave the heritage of the past. I mean, we must leave the thinking of ulama, and by labeling them as a conservative and so on. I don't respect this idea, because when all the experiments of modernist Islam by Islamic socialism is getting failed in many aspects, because they cannot understand the language of local tradition, especially the historical narrative between the role of ulama in preaching Islam and so on in Indonesia, because it is very complex history that must be taken into account by socialist activists themselves. So this is my critical point, and actually, in short, what I want to try to do in Indonesia now in these years and for the next years, I think, is how to do some kind of ijtihad, of intellectual effort, to provide a legitimate framework of thoughts or ideas that is responding to the Orthodox Islam, even the conservative one, and by taking critically their attitude and not rejecting totally their heritage for us now. And the second one, and for the ultimate goal of socialism. So I want to call this position as some kind of neo or post-traditionalist Islamic socialism. So I hope that it will be useful to identify this kind of socialism, which is I think it's a little bit different with socialism I know from the past history of our socialism in Indonesia, which is dominated largely by modernist narrative. I remember that there was a debate between a great ulama in Indonesia. His name is Kiai Hashim Ash'ari, with Sheikh Umar Khatib Al-Minangkabawi. Umar Khatib Al-Minangkabawi is a great ulama in Mecca, and he was very influenced by Sarekat Islam, by SE Sarekat Islam. Sarekat Islam is, I think, is the big organization of Islamic socialism in the first period of 20th century. And Hashim Ash'ari expressing, he expressed his disagreement about his critical position about Islamic socialism and so on, but appreciating its colonial spirit to its anti-colonial spirit to resist colonialism and capitalism. So this ambiguity, I think, is very interesting to look at the practice. So sometimes in Indonesia we get some resistance or struggle against capitalism, against exploitation from those who were claimed by many as conservative and so on. So I think that how to evaluate Islamic socialism in Indonesia, we must look at the practice itself, from expressed by activism itself. It's not sufficient to evaluate Islamic socialism only from the perspective of ideology or the coherence or the consistency of ideological framework itself. So this is the first my comment or my presentation for, and I'm apologizing for the lack of systematicity, because it's not easy at all to speak of Islamic socialism, especially of what we do, what we done in our activity, because we must take some distance to our practice itself. Okay, I think it's enough. Okay, for the first, and let me to answer some questions. Okay, thank
Great.
you.
So we'll take questions later, but I think we can now. This nicely builds onto what Rizky will talk about. So over to you, Rizky.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon and Layli and all my colleagues with this webinar. And thank you so much also for Suwan and Fayad, who has already explained a very insightful trajectory of Islamic socialism. So I just want to pick up what Fayad and Suwan had left off, which is about the islambergerak.com as media, contemporary online media for leftist Islam. I would like to share a slide. Okay, so should I put this? Okay. So Islamic socialism looks through Islam Bergerak. So what is Islam Bergerak? We are an online platform established in 2014, dedicated to support the praxis of defending the oppressed using social justice framework based on Islamic teaching, especially for Muslim communities, but not excluded to non-Muslims. And our approach is Marxist political economy as scientific and analytical tools. So the idea of Islam Bergerak is to always clearly and to firmly speaking of where we stand and what we oppose. And that's the point of where we want to move, or bergerak in Indonesian term. So the name Islam Bergerak is our homage to an original newspaper established by the Red Muslims in the 1920s, led by a famous anti-colonial and anti-capitalist figure, Haji Misbah, who is also known as a pious Muslim. So in the spirit, not only do we want to contextualize the struggle against capitalism and neocolonialism, but we will also like to use two efforts. I think Fayad already elaborated before. First, from the Islamic values, theological and perspective, meaning we actively seeking references to the progressive ideas and practices in Islam, and also combining the theological with the current material basis of people's life. And so we have this urgency to reclaim media as part of fostering ideas of socialism, in particular progressive Islam movement. So it is the reason behind the establishment of Islam Bergerak. We want to challenge the typology of Indonesian Islam as narrow as labels such as moderate, liberal, and radical. So we have this contextual setting. We have this celebrated pluralism and tolerance of Indonesian Islam, the rise of middle-class Muslims with Islamic lifestyle and Sharia business, Sharia or halal business, like a trend. But what does this celebrated moderate or liberal Islam mean for the majority of people? Has it addressed the problems, root causes of poverty and injustice, of the current alarming crisis of climate change, land conflict, etc., that the Indonesian people had suffered? And we also questioning, has our Islamic leaders discussed, for example, haram or haram products, not merely on the basis of the ingredients in it, such as pigs or alcohol, but also products that are produced by forced labor, modern slavery, or supporting any kinds of racist colonialism. So, and I would like to give a little background, I think, just to bring the discussion of a little bit history. Suwan already mentioned about historical elements of socialism from independence to after the Sukarno. And then during the new order under Suharto, which lasted for 32 years, there was this structured and systematic oppression towards any dissenting opinions and political oppositions. And we had also marginalizations and depoliticizing of Islamic forces. So we can say that moderate Islam in the new order was constructed by the regime. Although this strategy has existed pre-independence Indonesia for the interests of Dutch and Japanese colonial, for example, the moderate Islam, which has been facilitated by the state in the 1980s, has set the base for the continuation of taming any potential resistance by the Islamic forces within the state and market relations. So this was occurred in the 1980s simultaneously at the dawn of neoliberalism and global funded projects under the label of democratization by supporting various national and local NGOs. And we can see the legacy also in the 1998 after the reform. We can see the apparent tension between Islamic forces and the state. We no longer have the kind of only like moderate Islam co-opted by the state or supporting the state, but also those conservative or radical right-wing Islamic organizations also appear. And in this current pandemic crisis, then we often ask each other, where does this take us? Indonesia being one of the biggest Muslim majority countries in the world, the question is, has the need for alternative system to address the crisis given a chance for the idea of Islamic socialism to rise? Or as Gus Fayad mentioned earlier, the Islamic left or the progressive Islam in the context of Indonesia? The answer is hopeful, yes. But one of the biggest challenges also most often is that our battle at home is not directly with global capitalist corporations, but with the contradictory relations between the state and the Islamic forces, or Islam as social forces. And so we want to ask ourselves, who actually speaks for the people? Who actually speaks in the name of Islam? And how do we locate the current religious authorities in its relation to power? Is it alliance with the state or resisting the state, or is it in a sense of resisting the policies that perpetuate injustice? And because we see that sections of Islamic forces are making compromises with the state to put their agenda in a nationalistic frame, but there are also tensions among them. And so we would like to put forward that the ones who speak for the Ummah is the working class, the oppressed. We urge the need to center the emancipated working class. This might sound utopia, but this is what we aspire in the modern emancipated working class in the modern interpretations of Islam. And of course, when we speak about working class, we speak also in solidarity with the marginalized and other disenfranchised communities, such as poor women, informal workers, LGBTIQ, indigenous communities, and non-Muslims working class, who all suffered under capitalism. So we try to focus on not only the abstraction, the conception, and the theological aspect of Islam, progressive Islam, but on the manifestations of oppression in the people's battle of survival on a daily basis. And there has been an increased interest and curiosity on Islamic socialism in Indonesia, or Islamic left, particularly among young people. So this is, I would like to show you the most shared articles in Islam Bergerak in the last couple of years. These articles are originally published in Indonesian, but I translated the pages to English for this presentation. So in the bottom left, we see our editorial in 2016, when the biggest Muslim mass demonstration was held during the case of the controversial case of non-Muslim Jakarta governor at the time, Ahok. The demonstration, also known as 212 movement, there was around like estimated hundreds of thousands people hit the street. And the movement was continued until, I think, the presidential election in 2019. And this article, this is our editorial. It was shared by more than 15,000 readers, which means that the numbers of the actual readers are a lot higher. So, and we also see that there is an interest of young readers in finding inspiration for contemporary resistance and social justice according to Islam, and even interfaith. So we see that in the top left and the top right, articles written by Gus Fayat, entitled "What is Progressive Islam and Marxism and the Path to Liberation Jurisprudence." It was shared by more than 5,000 readers and almost 2,000 readers. And even the article written by our Christian comrades at the bottom right about Amir Sharifuddin, a communist and devout Christian, was shared by more than 4,000 readers. So as a media that tries to promote the ideas of socialism, this is a hopeful sign that young people are curious, are wanting to find out the alternatives from the current system. And so in its series of articles, discussions, interviews, and journalistic reports, Islam Bergerak tries to link this intersectional struggle between problems in urban and rural areas, of the rise of the Papuan people, of the issue of land dispossession, forced eviction, environment degradation, and even women's rights. We receive lots of articles sent by young contributors from our fellow friends who wrote about this a wide range of issues. And we also include analysis and insights from progressive Christian organizations. And so with this aim, Islam Bergerak determines not to only exist as a media separate from the struggle of the people, but Islam Bergerak wants to grow along offline with several of progressive organizations. For example, we become part of the platform for such as Nahdien Front for Sovereignty of Natural Resources, Progressive Islamic Forum. We support the establishment of laulawpapua.com, a new independent activist media in Papua. We also have a close ties with Indo Progress, which is a very well-known leftist media in Indonesia. So then we put forward the question how to shift the political Islam to a more progressive one. We try to shift the political Islam to political economy of Islam. So we are shifting now from the context of colonialism to capitalism. Is no longer the question of nationalism as the result of colonialism, but the question of class is the most relevant in capitalist society since it operates exploitation on a different mode. So, and then we also look forward to, looking forward the voice of ulama that would speak on this matter. We need influential Islamic leaders who will want to speak on behalf of this. And in terms of women's rights and women's issues, we will also want to offer an alternative perspective in addition to women in development and women in Islam, both. There has been lots of funding or projects in terms of women in women's rights in Islam, which is mostly based on Islamic reproductive rights and or in general economic rights or separate political rights. But we want to shift the discussion into women in part of the social reproduction and political economy rights embedded. So our task is to deal with socialist idea as a scientific tool and programmatic agenda, but it's also embedded in the values of Islamic teaching. So we're doing this by constantly analyzing, revealing, and advocating the impact of capitalism, both as, I think, abstraction or philosophical or systemic knowledge, and also as an exploitative system on the everyday life of the people aligned with our Islamic beliefs. And so what is our struggle as a media? And we have three main struggle, I think. So as a media, we would want to shed a light and support the causes of these issues. And I think that the concept of contemporary jihad now rests upon the tension between Islam and the state, although not always in an oppositional relationship, and also its attachment to capitalism. What once a strength of class struggle and ummah solidarity against colonialism in a pre-independence Indonesia is now shaped by the middle class and the interest of, and supported by the bourgeoisie to secure the power and interests of the national and local capitalist class, mainly on the logics of development. And so the changing political landscape and challenges in this neoliberal era that brings, like climate change, all the dire economic inequalities and various social, political, ecological destruction, we acknowledge it needs a call for resuscitation of the resistance spirit unprecedented to our society. So in this, as a media, we are striving to spread the word or da'wah on this particular struggle. Of course, there are lots of challenges ahead. There are utopias in our heads. But as a media, we would like to introduce this again after the disruption of the history that Suwan and Gus-Fayat already explained. So yes, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you to all three. That was amazing, and it's left us with plenty of food for thought for discussion. I'm going to end the recording here, and we'll move on to the question and answer session.